The following is a text exchange which occurred between brothers on August 3rd, 2021. 2:58 p.m. Remember Admiral Stockdale? I'm looking at this plaque with his picture on it here in Annapolis. Apparently his actual name was James Bond.
How did we not know that?
Well, I didn't know his name was James. It's possible this isn't Admiral Stockdale, I suppose. We could ask him if he was alive, but I bet he'd just respond, "Who am I? Why am I here?"
Well, he was born 30 years before James Bond novels.
Well, there you go. Maybe Ian Fleming was a Stockdale fan. Whoa, I just actually read the plaque for Stockdale. I haven't looked into what the details were for what he did, but it sounds like he made some rather bold moves, very much at his own expense. Seems like his efforts warrant more than being remembered as an historical punchline for his brief spell as a vice presidential candidate. Even rewatching his famous line, "Who am I? Why am I here?" just now, taken in the context of how it was actually delivered, it makes total sense. Of course, I didn't watch the rest of the debate, so maybe I'm the one lacking context. Straight from the heartland, this is Things I Text My Brother. Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of Things I Text My Brother, a series of conversations which have taken place between the brothers Drouillard on subjects spanning the neighborhood and the globe, which will hopefully leave you smarter, kinder, and better looking. Today we're going to jump off from that dramatic reading that you just heard to discuss the topics therein. Maybe we'll talk about James Bond. Maybe we'll talk about Admiral Stockdale. Maybe we'll talk about other vice presidential candidates. Maybe we'll talk about Phil Hartman, Saturday Night Live, or the psychology of survival. But we haven't plotted an exact course yet because we want you to join us on that journey. I'm Jeff. This is Brad. Let's talk about our texts. But before we dive back into our text exchange to talk about who Admiral James Bond Stockdale was and why he was here, we need to take a look back because it's always important to make time to cleanse ourselves of our past sins and to continue our boundless quest for self-improvement through worthless information. Thus, it's time for ablutions and edification. Alrighty, Brother Brad, I've been talking too much, and I hear that you have both an ablution and some edification.
I sure do, and they happen to be from the same episode, so I'm going to do them both today.
Ooh, nice.
Both of these are from episode 21 about the subterranean space race.
Ooh, yes, I like that one. It was souls of the damned crying out from the netherworld.
Well, it's good that you mentioned that. Keep that in the back of your mind when I hit my edification.
I will do that.
All right, so for the ablution, this makes me happier than it should, but I have an ablution for you, Brother Jeff.
Bring it.
In that episode where we talked about a sort of subterranean space race, you mentioned that the drilling at the Mohole project in the U.S. was defunded in 1966, which you said was 2 years before the moon landing. The moon landing was, of course, in 1969, not 1968, so that would have been 3 years after the Mohole project was defunded.
Well, it's only wrong if you have a grasp of basic mathematics, which I have never claimed.
And I'm pretty sure in a previous episode, we came across the fact that I also do not have a very strong grasp of basic mathematics.
So as long as all our listeners are stupid, we're okay.
Excellent. Now for the edification. Also from that episode, you just mentioned it, and we mentioned it during that episode, we talked about the well to hell. People dug this well, and they put a microphone down and said they could hear the souls of the damned screaming out. There's a crater in Turkmenistan that has been on fire for roughly 50 years. Would you like to hazard a guess as to why it has been on fire for so long?
Coal.
Methane. Dr. George Karunis descended into the burning crater, which gets up to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 370 degrees Celsius. He descended down in an aluminized protective suit for 17 whole minutes. Do you know what he found down there?
Coal.
Living bacteria, actually. Some which were actually consuming the methane.
Were the bacteria... were their souls damned?
No.
Oh.
But perhaps it wasn't damned souls that were screaming. Maybe it was a new type of bacteria that they heard in the well to hell. And the bacteria were screaming. They just had a cool ability.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It sounds likely.
Well, Dr. George came back and he said 12 people have stood on the moon, but only one person has been to the gates of hell.
Nice.
Hey, with all our usage of Celsius versus Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit versus Celsius, do you actually know the formulas for converting?
I don't know the formula for anything. Who do you think I am? Some kind of wizard?
You're a wizard, Harry. The
Dumbledore.
first
Snape.
Dumbledore.
Snape.
Severus
Snape. Dumbledore. Okay, what's the formula?
Yeah. It's Celsius times 1.8 plus 32. I actually do know that one. I had to look up Fahrenheit, which is Fahrenheit minus 32 times 5/9, which is much harder.
I'm assuming all of that is a future illusion, but I'm not going to be the one to prove it.
Oh no, it's all good. I feel strongly about that.
Thanks for edifying all of us about the bacteria from hell. Well done. Brother Brad, with all your ablutions and edification, you're on a roll, so why don't you keep going?
I didn't really plan to do much talking about James Bond because the whole James Bond thing is probably the least interesting thing about Admiral Stockdale.
I don't know anything about James Bond other than I remember who was the guy who played it when we were young? Roger Moore. And wasn't there somebody named Jaws?
Yes.
That was like a giant, and my friends played some video game in college where they shot each other, and I didn't even play that.
Oh, GoldenEye, yeah, it's a famous video game. But anyway, I wasn't going to talk about it, but then I wondered, because I did look up when we had the exchange, the timing of when Stockdale was born versus when Ian Fleming wrote the books, and saw the timing was off.
Yeah.
But I was curious where he actually came up with the name, so I looked it up, and Fleming has said that he named it James Bond after a famed ornithologist. What is an ornithologist?
They study birds?
Yes. Fleming was also a bird enthusiast, and he had a book on his desk written by James Bond about Caribbean birds, and he envisioned his character being a bland, uninteresting fellow who had interesting things happen to him, not being the suave, debonair global phenomenon he became.
Oh.
So he was sitting there, and he looked, and he saw this book, and he saw the name James Bond, and he thought it sounded like the most bland, uninteresting, basic name ever. So he named his character James Bond.
Autobahn.
No.
John James Autobahn.
No, but similar. Apparently, the bird-loving real-life Bond and his wife met Ian Fleming, and they thought it was a good joke. They enjoyed it.
Well, it's a pretty good joke, but I think mine might actually be even better.
I don't know. Maybe. I'm glad that you did mention in the text that put in context of why he said, "Who am I? Why am I here?" It wasn't just the punchline that Phil Hartman and SNL turned it into, which was glorious.
Mm-hmm.
And Phil Hartman, I miss that man.
He was wonderful.
Yeah, but I'm glad you mentioned that because there's so much more to James Bond Stockdale than that. And I don't think I mean, maybe I knew at the time in passing, but I don't remember it. I would have been, a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, it was 1992.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been paying attention too much. But I would like to learn more. I think our listeners, maybe they don't know either.
Yeah, well, we're just talking about whose joke was better, yours or mine. Well,
no, Ian Fleming's joke, not my joke.
Oh, okay. Ian Fleming's joke or my joke. And the answer is clearly my joke. But one thing that was considered a joke for many people was James Stockdale. And the only way I knew Admiral Stockdale was from his brief blip on the national radar in 1992. I would have been younger than you, so I was probably in middle school or something like that. If he was on my radar at all, it was as Phil Hartman cruising through the countryside with Dana Carvey playing H. Ross Perot, which, by the way, was kind of a unique trick because during that same presidential election cycle, he was playing George Bush as well as H. Ross Perot, which is a little bit tricky.
He was a master of disguise.
He was a master of disguise. Well played. But Phil Hartman as James Stockdale, I assumed it was a character that happened over and over again. And during my research today, I think he only played him once on the show. And H. Ross Perot is basically driving them through the countryside. They're listening to country music while driving this big boat of a car, like Americans would have been driving at the time, through a green screen countryside. The gimmick is that Dana Carvey is just praising Admiral Stockdale and praising him en route to dropping him off in the countryside like somebody would a dog that they're trying to get rid of without being too mean to the dog while they get rid of him. And of course, the first thing Phil Hartman as Admiral Stockdale says is, "Where are we going?" He's looking crazy. He's got blinky eyes, a disheveled white wig. His glasses are pulling on and off. He can't hear things. And Dana Carvey, meanwhile, is just complimenting his debate performance. He's saying, "You had an H-bomb in the debate. The other fellas had a slingshot." But this is all going back to the actual debate in which James Stockdale, this guy who was 100% a military hero, He was in the Navy for 37 years, so he was an outsider in terms of politics, and of course he was campaigning specifically on that being the case. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. He was one of the most highly decorated officers in the history of the Navy, with 26 personal combat decorations, including 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 3 Distinguished Service Medals, 2 Purple Hearts, and 4 Silver Star Medals, in addition to his Medal of Honor.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yep. And all of this doesn't specifically talk about the period of his life, which he considered to be the defining time period of his life, which was the time that he spent in the famous prison known as the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. He was in the Hanoi Hilton for over 7 years, tortured anywhere from 15 to 20 times, depending on the source that you look at. He was denied medical care, malnourished, beaten. All the while, he was maintaining a leadership role. So he basically, as the highest ranking naval officer that was in the prison, he just kind of assumed this role as a leader, setting the example for the other people who were imprisoned in this prison and establishing not just codes for them to communicate and support each other, but setting the expectations in terms of bravery, in terms of holding information and doing the right thing, which I would never be able to do under the torture he received, but encouraging the other people to do so. He was 100% this absolute war hero. And you look him up, and some of that stuff comes up right along next to who am I, why am I here, and the fact that he didn't have a great answer. He said he was out of ammo when they asked him about healthcare. He was struggling to put his glasses on during one early segment, during his opening statements, actually. His hearing aid was off, and he didn't hear another question. His hearing aid was essential to him because he had been beaten, and he suffered from those horrific injuries sustained from torture all those years ago. He's just an incredibly impressive guy that I'm glad I saw this plaque. Had I not been walking through, I'm not even sure what the building was at the United States Naval Academy. I was walking through a building and I saw this plaque on my way to the bathroom and it had his picture on it. It's like, oh, Admiral Stockdale, I know him. And then I was like, haha, James Bond. And I texted you before I even read the plaque. And then I read the plaque. I was like, this is the guy we've been laughing at since 1992. And yeah. I was pretty sad about that.
Yeah.
As a public service announcement, America, some of you are smarter and more well-versed than I am, and you knew this. But if you didn't, if you were one of the people that had only known James Bond Stockdale to laugh at him, I want you to at least know something else.
I'm also going to assume that many of our listeners never even heard of Stockdale. And one, they're missing a great segment from a great time period of Saturday Night Live and a great comedic actor in Phil Hartman, but they also would have missed out on some interesting history. I really suppose I should have known, at least in the back of my mind, that Stockdale wasn't just a joke, because when I was getting my MBA in the early 2000s, I had to read Good to Great.
Yeah.
Why some companies make the leap and others don't. And then there's the Stockdale paradox in there. Having read that book, I'm sure I read a little bit more about Stockdale. I don't know. You probably came across the Stockdale paradox as well, yes?
Yeah, so being a person who also studied some business-related things in college, which I don't know how that actually happened to me, but I did. I most certainly did not read Jim Collins' book From Good to Great, even though it does stand as a pillar of the management theory, whatever. You can see how eloquently I speak on the subject of business. Even though understanding sports, I guess I should understand management theory and survival psychology and how that all comes together. But I did have a chance to look into the Stockdale paradox, which is this management theory that developed out of Jim Collins' best-selling book, From Good to Great. And it's all based on Admiral Stockdale's principles, which in turn are very much relying upon the Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. And what Epictetus had said is that external elements are not in your control, and that what we can control is our response and our actions. The Stockdale paradox, in essence, says you must maintain unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, and at the time, have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. So let's say you're Admiral Stockdale. You lead the first bombing raid in Vietnam. Then on a later mission, you're shot down. You land in a village. While ejecting from your plane, you break a bone in your back, you get to the ground and your leg is broken and the townspeople beat you. You're taken to this prison. You're beaten and tortured to get information right from the start. And then when you're found out to be a leader of the prison resistance, you're beaten and tortured even more. He couldn't control any of that, but he could project what he wanted the other people to see. And there was a very famous incident while he was in the Hanoi Hilton in which James Stockdale was told that he was going to be paraded in front of an audience to set an example. And he did not want to be used as propaganda. So he actually cut his scalp so that he would be bleeding from the head and disfigured up there. And his captors were like, okay, we'll put a hat on him. So he then took a stool that was in his cell and beat his face with it until he was completely disfigured and unrecognizable. And he did that so that he could not be put on display, so that he could not be used to serve the other people's purposes. He took the situation he was given, he met it calmly, he assessed the situation, and created the result that could do the best not just for him, but in this case for those around him and for a greater cause. And you can see how that survival psychology as a management principle would be pretty inspiring. Now, let me ask you, though. You've studied business and you've worked in the business world. Have you found these principles to be helpful?
To be fair, I have 8 years of business school between my undergraduate and master's degree, and I learned one useful thing, which is you have to know how to manage your manager and understand what they want and build what they want, generally speaking. So, have I found that beating myself results in better products and more success for my company? No. I don't believe in the head in the sand philosophy where you just use hope as a strategy. Sometimes it's the only thing you have, but it's not really a strategy.
Yeah.
And I think that fits very well with the Stockdale paradox because he had hope, but what he had was faith that things were going to turn out okay. Not hope that it was going to turn out okay soon or it was going to turn out great for everybody.
Yeah. And in fact, he stated that very clearly. And in his conversations with Collins and From Good to Great, quoting Stockdale, he said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event in my life, which in retrospect I would not trade." And Collins then asked him, well, who didn't make it out then? And Stockdale said, well, that's easy, the optimists. They were the ones who said we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. And then they'd say we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart. Stockdale went on to say that this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts you have in your current reality, whatever they may be. I definitely love that. If I was capable of any of this, I wouldn't be on anxiety meds. But I'm not, so I certainly admire it.
I often use the phrase at work, there's no just, easy, or simple in what we do, and hope is not a strategy. Although sometimes that's all you have. And sometimes that is all you have, but I'm not dealing with life or death decisions, so I can have a little bit of hope every now and then, because the shorter time window of the issues that I'm dealing with.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it today, and it's interesting where we get our messaging, who can say the most profound things, and who can say the most profound things and instead be remembered for saying, "Who am I? Gridlock, ping pong."
Right.
Because Admiral Stockdale, he goes on after being first in, last one out of Vietnam, coming home as a war hero. He establishes this friendship with Ross Perot, essentially based on the fact that Ross Perot worked along with Stockdale's wife while Stockdale was a POW to try and help the POW. So there was a solid foundation in there. He becomes the vice presidential running mate temporarily for Perot, just to get him basically on the ballot. And he was going to be replaced, but Perot never really replaced him. Perot ducks out of the election, out of the race, and comes back in just before that debate. The other guys, Dan Quayle and Al Gore, are preparing endlessly. They never stopped preparing. Stockdale, who is not a politician, not trained for this to start, comes in on less than a couple weeks' notice and gets on the stage for this debate, the sound bites from which come to define his name in the consciousness. And that's just so sad. But I was also thinking that what Stockdale truly believed in, those Stoic values of the Greek philosophers and Epictetus, it's not all that different from something I heard a drag queen say one time. She said basically that we get where we want to be in the end. And if you don't like where you are, it's not the end. From Epictetus to Admiral Stockdale to anonymous drag queen whose name I can't remember, they're all saying, don't freak out. But what do I wake up most mornings doing, Brad?
Freaking out, I would imagine.
Freaking out.
I'm with you.
And then I pet the dogs, because in the morning they do the cutest thing. Bill Clinton, the dog, hops up into the bed, and Woody, the dog, hops up into the bed. Not Bill Clinton, the human.
Not in your bed, anyway.
Whoa!
Oh, zing!
But Bill Clinton, the dog, and Woody hop into the bed, and we have cuddle time in the morning, and we pet their bellies. It's really, really sweet. Then I go back to anxiety and panic.
I'm not far from it. I think that's probably somewhat a family trait for us.
I did see a quote from Stockdale, though. One last thing about him. If you're a person who follows the words of Epictetus, and if you spend over 7 years in a Hanoi prison, you're not going to worry about a few people mocking you when they don't know the whole story. Nonetheless, he had a good attitude about it. In the LA Times in 1994, so just a couple years after the debate, he said, "There are certain things I'm good at. Fighter pilot, I'm good at. I was damn good at leading a prison underground. But vice president? That was a lark." Good on you, Admiral Stockdale.
And frankly, the way the vice presidency works, other than if the president happens to die, which hasn't happened for some time, thankfully, there's not a whole lot you have to do as vice president. Some do more than others, and some are asked to do more than others. And obviously, when we first had president and vice president, the vice president was the runner-up in the election for the presidency.
That's insane.
Can you imagine?
That's absolutely
that would have been
insane.
in the case in our country here?
I can't.
It would have been a complete and utter train wreck.
Really, at any point in American history, it would have been a disaster, and it was a disaster, but yeah, I can't even imagine it now.
Well, and even when they changed it, it was a disaster, because that was when Aaron Burr, that's right. Aaron Burr and Jefferson tied for the presidency because they were on the ballot together because they were hoping one would get more and one would get the second most as opposed to the opposition parties. But they tied, and it went through like 32 rounds in Congress before they finally picked Jefferson. And then Aaron Burr was vice president. So they changed the rule after that.
Yeah.
But certainly you can say it wasn't really Stockdale's fault that Perot lost. Other than Theodore Roosevelt and his Bull Moose candidacy in 1912, a third party really hasn't had much of a chance.
No.
Of course, that candidacy was only called the Bull Moose candidacy because Theodore Roosevelt gets shot while doing a campaign speech. Somebody shoots him, it hits an eyeglass case and a folded up version of his speech and embeds in his chest. Roosevelt gives the speech anyway. While bleeding, he assesses the situation. He says, "I'm not coughing up blood, so it didn't hit a lung, so I'm all right." He gives an hour-long speech with a bullet in him, encourages the crowd not to lynch the guy who shoots him.
Nice.
And saves that guy's life so he can go and then die in a mental institution. But saves that guy's life, takes 2 weeks off the campaign trail, and then comes back and says, "I'm like a bull moose," so it's a bull moose candidacy. And Taft and Wilson, who are running against him, also took 2 weeks off of campaigning while he was recuperating. As a show of fair play, like I can't imagine that ever happening again.
No.
But also, at that same time period, Eugene Debs ran for president 2 elections later. In 1920, ran for president while in prison for violating the Espionage Act of 1917 by arguing against World War I. And then the next time he ran, once Warren G. Harding gave him the pardon. So then he ran again in the next election, but he ran as convict number 9653. But George McGovern, when he ran in 1972, picked Tom Eggleton to be his vice presidential candidate. But that only lasted 18 days when McGovern realized he was crazy and would be totally mentally unfit to be president if it ever happened. So he jettisoned him.
Oh.
You also have terrible vice presidents like John C. Calhoun, who was vice president for John Quincy Adams. And near the end of his term with John Quincy Adams, he quit John Quincy Adams' White House, his regime, and he started running with Andrew Jackson against John Quincy Adams in the next election. And Jackson wins, and he quits during Jackson's term to go into Congress and actively fight against everything Jackson was doing. And I also saw some images of John C. Calhoun.
Crazy person.
Oh my God, he looks so scary.
Yeah.
For my money, though, my favorite bad VP quote is actually from Richard Nixon. When running with Agnew in 1972 as well, he was asked why he stuck with Spiro Agnew. And Nixon stated, "Because no assassin in their right mind would kill me."
That's a good answer.
Also in that same debate with Stockdale was Dan Quayle. I'm not sure if SNL made him look as bad as they made Stockdale look. I don't remember it. I'm sure they made fun of him. But here's a fun game for you. This is the "Did Dan Quayle Say This" game. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
One word sums up probably the responsibility of any vice president, and that one word is to be prepared.
Yeah, he said that.
He did. I have made good judgments in the past. I have made good judgments in the future.
I'm guessing he said that.
He did. If we don't succeed, we run the risk of failure.
Well, that's just true.
He did not say that.
Yeah.
A low voter turnout is an indication of fewer people going to the polls.
That's true. But I don't know whether he said that.
He also didn't say that. We're going to have the best educated American people in the world.
He did say that.
He did say that. I regret I didn't study Latin harder in school so I could converse with people in Latin America.
I'm hoping he said that.
He did not, but one of his senatorial colleagues did say that he said that.
Oh.
But it was a joke, but people missed that part. The Holocaust was an obscene period in our nation's history. I mean, in this century's history. But we all lived in this century. I didn't live in this century.
I don't even know what you just said.
He said it.
Yeah, but he said it.
He said it. I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix. Also true. So that's the Dan Quayle game. That's the man we probably should be making fun of. Probably Dan Quayle and probably Al Gore before Admiral Stockdale, frankly.
Yeah, well, for him, the punchline that I know to make fun of Dan Quayle about all these years later is just that extra E on potato.
Yes.
I was just thinking today, I got to talk to Bob Dole once, and he had some SNL punchlines it was him saying Bob Dole, I think.
There's a thing in The Simpsons where he gets captured by aliens, and as he's being beamed up, he says, Bob Dole didn't need this. Only tangentially related to all of this, I was researching the names of fictional characters to try to find some that were named after military figures in the whole James Bond, Stockdale, James Bond thing. I gave up really quickly on that because it actually wasn't fun or interesting.
Quitter.
I know. But I did run across a list of names of fictional characters, full names, many of which I did not know. According to an article I saw on mentalfloss.com, these are some of those names. Captain Crunch, his full name is Horatio Magellan Crunch.
Good name.
The Monopoly inmate on the jail square, his name is Jake the Jailbird.
Good.
Mr. Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street actually has a first name, which I did not know. His first name is Aloysius.
Snuffleupagus has a first name. It's Oscar.
No.
Snuffleupagus has a second name. It's Mayer.
No.
My Snuffleupagus has a name. It's Bologna.
It's Aloysius. Ken Carson and Barbara Millicent Roberts. Hazard a guess as to who they are?
That's Barbie and Ken.
It is. And sticking with pretentious-sounding names, I have one more. Mr. Peanut, the Planters mascot, the kid who won the drawing contest, who drew the famous Mr. Peanut, also submitted a name. His name was Bartholomew Richard Fitzgerald Smith. That is hyphenated Fitzgerald Smith, and Smith is spelled S-M-Y-T-H-E.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought it was going to be like Commodore Vanderbilt Peanut.
Nope. Bartholomew Richard Fitzgerald Smith.
Well, alrighty, Brother Brad, there's one man who is not a fictional character, but does have a full name. He's our Father Art, and we're going to ask him some questions.
Did you know that the Planters mascot, Mr. Peanut, had a name given to him by the child who drew Mr. Peanut?
No, but I'm not surprised.
What would you think that name might be?
I can't guess. Nutty?
His name, according to the child who drew him, was Bartholomew Richard Fitzgerald Smith.
Okay.
That is Mr. Peanut's official name.
Not to me.
As a man of the world,
Yeah.
what do you know about Admiral Stockdale?
Just a little bit in passing, but nothing I can specifically recall.
Did you know his name was James Bond Stockdale?
I did not know that his middle name was Bond.
He is not named after James Bond, the super agent, because he was born before James Bond was written.
Okay.
James Bond, the super spy, is named after an ornithologist.
Did not know that.
Do you know what an ornithologist is?
I do know what an ornithologist is. An ornithologist is a bird specialist.
Excellent. You've been listening to our podcast.
No, I also watch birds.
Admiral Stockdale is most noted for asking the questions, "Who am I? Why am I here?" during the 1992 vice presidential debate. Do you remember anything which the other two VP candidates, Dan Quayle or Al Gore, said that day?
No, but I am kind of a big fan of of Al Gore because he helped a friend of mine at Harvard when he was trying out for the basketball team.
You did?
Yeah, Dennis was hurt. He was an all-state player in high school, but then his junior or senior year he hurt his knee and couldn't play like he did before. But he tried out for the team, and he played pretty well. But they kept Al Gore, and they cut Dennis, and Al Gore went into the coach and told him, I don't know why you kept me and cut him, but he's a much better player. And the guy said, offensively, that's true, but with his knee, we didn't think he could play defense.
Huh.
But he tried to give up his own spot. You know, I mean, Dennis went to Harvard with Tommy Lee Jones and a bunch of other people, but he actually was a friend of Al Gore's.
That's almost a Rudy moment.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Stockdale was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroic resistance and leadership during his 7-year imprisonment in the infamous Hanoi Hilton. What does such service and willing sacrifice mean to you as someone who lived through that era and who had several family members who served through most of the major 20th century conflicts?
Nothing but respect for anybody that served at that time and made the sacrifices they made, my brothers included, and they all say that the real heroes are the ones who didn't come back.
Having brothers and your father served in the military, I know that you had considered it. Why did you ultimately not end up in the military service?
I actually did enlist, and I failed the physical, so I did attempt to follow my brothers and father in military service.
Which service did you attempt to join?
Actually, I attempted to enlist in the Air Force, but during that time I was called for my Army physical, and I failed the exam because of my eyesight.
Huh. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, now that we've heard from Father Art, it means that our time together is coming to an end for this episode. We've said just about everything we're prepared to say about Warren G., Spiro Agnew, the Stockdale Paradox, John Calhoun, the Bull Moose Party, the Hanoi Hilton, Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus, and Aloysius Snuffleupagus. But fear not. Just as soon as we can dig back into the archives and find another gem of a text exchange, there will be another episode coming your way. In the meantime, you can head over to our Instagram page at Things I Text My Brother Podcast to drop us a note about what you liked, what you didn't like, or to tell us about something we got totally wrong. You might even have time to go tell a friend, an enemy, and Eric Need to give us a listen as well. If you manage to do any of that, the Fraternity of Drouillards will be forever grateful. But most importantly, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, Annie.
Who am I? Who am I? Why am I here?
Whoa.
Who am I?
Stop.
Why am I here?
He won't stop
Who
talking.
am I? Why am I here?
Why won't he stop talking?
Who am I? Why am I here? Who am I? Why am I
That's the
here?
real one, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm not a politician. Everybody knows that. So don't expect me to use the language of the Washington Insider. 37 years in the Navy, and only one of them up there in Washington. And now I'm an academic. The centerpiece of my life was the Vietnam War. I was there the day it started. I led the first bombing raid against North Vietnam. I was there the day it ended, and I was there for everything in between. 10 years in Vietnam, aerial combat, and torture. I know things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. I know some things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. And I know how governments, how American governments can be courageous and how they can be callous. And that's important. That's one thing I'm an insider on.